Everything you need to know about fountain pens in 13 minutes. We'll start with the parts of the pen. This is the cap and this is the body. There are screw caps and slip caps. This one is a screw cap. This is the finial. This could be round or flat and many times has the company's logo. This is a trim ring, and if I have to tell you this is a clip, back away slowly and pick up your Bic. And this is the cap band. Sometimes it can be one and sometimes it can be several. This is the section which holds the nib, and next to that is the threads to the cap, and then the ink window. And then the barrel, another trim ring, and then the end cap, blind cap, or piston knob. These rings, along with the clip and the cap band, is considered hardware. A fountain pen is not required to have any of these. This is parts of the nib. It's the metal part that actually goes into the section. This is the shoulder. This is typically where the company has their logo, the metal content, and the nib width. Like this, it can be stamped or it can be lasered like this one. People have strong feelings about this and will tell you in great detail. There can be designs and scroll work, and this one is in 2 tones of yellow and white gold. These 2 sides, separated by the breather hole and the slit, are called tines, like on a fork, because you'll be forking over all your discretionary income to buying fountain pens. Nibs can be made of gold, like this one is 18 karat, or of exotic metals like this platinum and argentium silver, or the increasingly popular metal titanium. But by far the most popular material is stainless steel. This cheeky guy is probably your best bang for your buck. Now if we flip the pen, on the other side of the nib is the feed. Most feeds have these fins, but they're not always there. Feeds are what draw your ink out of your reservoir into your nib tip. They're typically made of plastic or ebonite, and people will wax poetic about ebonite feeds. There are a variety of nib types. This one is called a monarch, made by Schoen Design. This one is a music, and it's typically characterized by having 2 slits and 3 tines. If we flip it over, you can see it a little bit easier. When you use the music nib, it makes fat, juicy vertical lines and thinner horizontal lines. It was supposedly made to make musical notes easier. And then there are hooded nibs. This is a Parker 51, and you can see why it's called hooded. Part of the nib is covered. And you can also see that the feed is one of those that don't have any fins. This is kind of typical of a lot of hooded nibs. And this is a Lamy 2000, also considered like a partially hooded nib. Most hooded nibs are kind of small, and again, the feed has no fins. Though there is some controversy, this could also be considered a hooded nib, and this is a pilot capless, also called a vanishing point, and again, no fins on the feed. If you look closely at the tip of this nib, it'll look like it has layers. This is called a stacked nib. This allows for greater ink flow and line variation. Nibs can come in different colors, and this one is a stub. A stub is basically an italic nib with rounded corners. You can see the tip is kind of squared off, and the width of that tip is measured in millimeters, and this is a 1.1 stub. And much like the music nib, we have wider vertical lines and skinnier horizontal lines. If this was a straight italic, these corners would be sharper. Though not as dramatic, an architect nib allows you to write wider horizontal lines and slightly thinner vertical lines. Then there's the whole category of flex nibs. They can be modern ones like this one, where there's all kinds of cutouts and slits to allow the tines to spread as you press it down onto the paper, so that the overall effect is flowing lines with thicker and thinner parts to look kind of like calligraphy. There are long and ardent discussions on whether or not a vintage flex is better, a modern flex, gold flex, stainless steel flex. It can be quite overwhelming. This bent-looking nib is called a fude nib, and it's ostensibly used to write Chinese characters. It does give you some line variation, and this one was bent by Nagahara. Nagahara-san, pictured here with his son working in the Tokyo International Pen Show, is probably the most famous Japanese nib meisters. They're called a variety of names: Nib Meister, Nib Specialist, Nib Grinder. This is Kirk Spear of Pen Realm working the San Francisco Pen Show. They can adjust your nib so that it writes better. They can grind down a nib to a different width or fix, like say, bent tines. This is Gina Salarino from the Custom Nib Studio and Mark Backus of Nib Grinder. They typically work pen shows, and some of them have websites to where you can send your pens. Here's CY of Q Sato giving a lecture on Odushi on fountain pens, and many of them can do things like fix vintage pens. They are a real resource for fountain pen users. They're easy to find because they have more ink on their fingers than I do. Now everyone makes this next part more complicated than it needs to be. There are only two types: suckers and drug addicts. Let's cover drug addicts. It's basically an eyedropper or something that uses gravity to get ink into your pen. It's just nowadays it's easier to use a blunt-tipped syringe instead of an eyedropper. The big clue is most eyedropper pens come with an eyedropper. You suck up the ink with the eyedropper or the syringe, and then you enter it into whatever chamber that holds the ink and squirt or drop the ink into that chamber. This is a vintage Waterman safety pen, and you eyedropper the ink right into that opening, and the nib itself sits in that reservoir of ink. You extend the nib and it seals off that whole reservoir of ink, and then you can write with it. Probably the most famous of the modern eyedroppers is the Opus 88, but many pens can be converted to an eyedropper by using the barrel as an ink reservoir and some silicone grease to keep it from leaking. The cartridge is also a drug addict. It's just that somebody else has already eyedroppered or entered the ink into the cartridge for you. But also, after you've used that cartridge up, you can take it out of your pen, rinse it out with your syringe with some water, and then refill it with ink and reuse it. To use a cartridge, you unscrew the barrel from the section and then take the appropriate cartridge to use. There is an international standard size cartridge that many pens use, but many pens have their own proprietary cartridge. This is solely done to keep everyone confused. Push the cartridge in until you feel it give. And while you have the barrel off, you can squeeze it a bit to get some ink to go down into the feed. Screw the barrel back on and you're ready to write, unless you didn't squeeze the cartridge, in which case you can just kind of let the pen rest a bit until you get some ink into the feed. With suckers, you basically create a vacuum and then that sucks the ink into the pen. This is called a piston filler, and you turn the piston knob to draw the piston up away from the section of the pen. This creates a vacuum, and with the nib inside of the ink bottle, it sucks ink up into the pen. It's the same principle with the converter portion of a cartridge converter pen. This is a pilot converter. Same principle, but different mechanism for the TWSBI VAC 700. You push the piston toward the section, that creates a vacuum behind the piston, and once it hits this wider opening, that vacuum sucks up the ink. It's the same principle for even vintage pens like this Parker 51 Aerometric filler. Squeezing the bar pushes air out of the sac, creating a vacuum, and then it sucks up the ink. But the main thing to remember when you're refilling is to put the pen in deep enough into the ink so that it covers all of the nib, because the ink does not come in through the tip of the nib, but instead at the base of the section. Here's a close-up of the section and the feed, and a close-up where the ink goes in. This is the clear feed from the earlier piston filler. And looking down the feed, this is magnified and lit, and you can see the rectangular hole there on the bottom. So you need to put your pen in where the ink level goes up beyond that hole to be able to suck up ink into your pen. I get a lot of questions about nib size and nib width, mainly because many times people use the word size when they really mean width. Think of this picture when you think of nib size. It's the size of the nib. And think of the nib width as the width of the line when you actually write with the fountain pen. Everyone is familiar with extra fine, fine, medium. There's also fine medium from Pilot. And then there's the Pulp Fiction nib from Sailor, or the MF, and broad. And then there's a whole slew of specialty nibs like double broad, coarse, posting. but for the most part, the normal sizes are EF, F, M, and B. And as a general rule, like Japanese nibs are a little bit thinner for the same width, like so their F is thinner than a Western F. Nib size is confusing not only because people usually mean nib width when they use the word nib size, but also nib sizes are just a complete mess. In the custom Marushi on the left, it's a size 30, which is a bigger one, and then on the Pilot Custom 74 on the right, it's a size number 5. But sailor nibs are kind of smallish, largish, and king of pen size-ish. But Yovo's sizes are loosely based on the width of their feed, with the number 6 being approximately 6 millimeters and the most popular. Many small pen makers use the Yovo number 6 or the Bach number 6, which is like the 250. This one has a hibiscus on it. I would just get a pen on whether or not I liked writing with it and not worry too much about the nib size. Pens are made of an incredible range of different kinds of material. These pens are mostly injection molded resin, which is basically plastic and probably the most popular kind of pen. Macrolon is a polycarbonate plastic for the Lamy 2000. And recently what's become very popular are like high-performance plastics. These are strong, durable thermoplastics like Peak and this pen here, Ultim. I've on purposely washed this pen in the washing machine and dryer. This pen made by Kasama can definitely take a beating. But please be aware, this should only be attempted by a professionally trained idiot. Pens are also made of different kinds of metal, with the most popular being stainless steel, and exotic titanium, and traditional beautiful sterling. People like different kinds of materials for their texture and their feel and their unique properties. This is micarta, which is a fabric impregnated with resin. And a very popular material is ebonite, which is vulcanized rubber. And one of the most popular companies for ebonite is Nico Ebonite. Then you can get some real oddities. This one is a pen that's made out of bakelite with an ebonite cap. And this one's made of precious resin because it's mined from the foothills of the White Mountain. I'll finish up with some famous pen quotes. The pen is mightier than the sword. Fountain pen ink flow is actually a controlled leak. This has been attributed to Richard Bender. And Voltaire said, "To hold a pen is to be at war." I'm a bit of a psycho pen person, but I've calmed down a lot.